welcome to another video. This is another video that was part of my July lineup. I watched this back in July, was planning to record it in July. If you've seen my other videos mentioning this subject, then you already know what happened. But I decided to drop it in October since it's a horror movie. I figured they'd fit in here quite nicely, fitting the season. So, we're just gonna dive right in, okay? Shall we? Yep, sounds good, great. Animosity is a 2013 American horror mystery film written and directed by Brendan Steer. In it, a newlywed couple moves into a house in the middle of the woods only to discover that the surrounding forest is host to sinister supernatural powers which turn them against each other. This is another one of those occasions where I would say the synopsis I was sent is not at all that close to the events of the film. Now, this film was made back in 2012, I believe, and was done as a thesis project at the School of Visual Arts. Thanks to the director's success with his film The Velocipaster, he's now able to go back and spread this film around and get it some more notice. That fact alone makes the film semi-interesting. It's good and smart to see Steer using his success to give more recognition to past projects. I mean, who wouldn't? I just wish the same level of work went into the film itself. The sound mixing is probably the film's biggest downfall. In a great number of scenes, the sound drops drastically low, almost as if they were using B-roll footage that didn't have the right mic setup, but then in some moments the sound drops out altogether. In low audio moments, attempts to increase the volume will be met with potential ear perforation because the following audio clip is much higher than it should be, and you've just turned up the volume to be met with the nasty surprise. But it was the early days of the director's filmmaking journey, so early on mistakes are bound to happen. Many people complained about scenes in the dark being too dark. For me, that wasn't a problem. If someone turned all the lights out and couldn't see anything, I would assume it's because, you know, someone turned all the lights out. A lamp or light switch was usually turned on soon after and all was fine. So for me, the film didn't have a darkness problem. It's by no means a terrible story. It is a mystery indeed. People keep comparing it to Cabin in the Woods or any Cabin in the Woods type film. Well, for starters, it's not a cabin, it's a house, but I see little correlation anyway. For me, this film feels far more like Pet Sematary, if Pet Sematary never attempted to explain any of the plot to the viewer. It's not until 1 hour and 13 minutes into the film it even provides us with a fraction of insight as to what is going on. Up until then, the film really is leaning hard into the mystery. I found myself engrossed in it simply because I was desperate to understand what was going on. What we are able to gauge is that after husband and wife move into their new house in the woods, the wife died in a car accident, though we never see this. This is only told to us briefly. The next day or so, the husband wakes to find his wife alive and well beside him in bed, as though nothing had happened. How very odd. Now, here's where the story gets murky, as if the lack of depicting most of the events of the film wasn't making things hard enough. At some point, scientific researcher husband contacts his boss and his boss's assistant, who is also his mistress, a subplot that was entirely irrelevant, and the boss decides it would be a good idea to start conducting experiments on the new wife. And with little to no protest from the supposed grieving husband, they get to work in the neighbor's basement of all places. It would seem that Carrie, the wife, has died and somehow returned nearly 100 times over a span of we don't know how long, as if stuck on a time loop. She picks up her memories the day before her death and resumes from there. At some point, husband Mike and his colleagues take her, lock her up, and begin their experiments, including cutting off limbs to see if they grow back, which they don't. They have killed many Carries and a new one has come back each time, though we never see this happen once. We're also told that the new versions of the dead people have a shelf life. At some point they become violent and then they just die on their own, though again we never see this happen, so not sure what to make of that. While the latest version of Carrie does become violent, this only happens after she survives her husband trying to kill her and dumping her in the woods and finding out about his sick and twisted studies, so I wouldn't call this violence, I'd call this self-defense and self-preservation. We're also told, and this part does end up being depicted, thank goodness, that the copies can't leave the property. There's an invisible barrier around, and when they venture too far off the property, they are met with eardrum-shattering noises that cause them insurmountable pain that only stops when they retreat back towards the safety of the boundary line. We are never told why this happens, but unlike most of what we're told about, at least we witness this happen. While we are told that the new copies of the recently deceased return at some point and become violent and die, this is also something we never see happen, so there's no way to know if this is true or not. The only people we see being violent are the people who didn't die. The film opens with a woman sawing her own daughter into pieces before selling her house to Mike and Carrie. We see her again later, and it is implied like Mike, her daughter died and returned from the dead, and she had to repeatedly kill her, and she began burying the bodies beyond the boundary line to stop her from coming back, which apparently worked. The issue with that is, again, we're never told how people come back. We never see a returning from the grave. We're only meant to believe this because characters tell us so. And frankly, if I didn't see it happen, then I'm not convinced it did. Crazy neighbor who is allowing experiments to be conducted in his basement seems to be going through the same process with a young boy. We see the neighbor Tom kill the boy twice, and safe to say, he keeps coming back. Now, the other characters kept calling the boy his son, but when the boy wakes up in bed after we had seen him shot to death in another scene, he looks at Tom and doesn't call him dad, he calls him Mr. Insert last name here because I don't remember what it was, which is the most suspicious and underexplained plot point yet. It would almost seem that Tom, who appears quite sadistic, actually has been using this anomaly of their properties to repeatedly commit murder of an innocent neighbor boy for his own amusement. Tom tells Carrie there is no way to escape or stop what's happening, that it's in her biology, which is quite contradictory, but he also says that if her husband dies, then so does she. This again is never explained nor attempted. Previous owner Lauren seemed to break the cycle, but was it by moving or burying the bodies beyond the property? We do not know. We see several characters die on the property, and yet they don't come back from the dead or have new copies appear overnight, so this resurrection storyline is full of holes. One character does come back. Again, we don't technically see the body rise from the grave, we just see her the next day, active. But it's supposedly only brought back so her lover can use her to explain her own disappearance before killing her again. Because, yeah, most of what we are told about the rules of this miracle we never actually see or witness, so it's hard not to take them with a grain of salt. It's not fleshed out, but we can put two and two together to see scientist Carl, the sadistic adulterer who is sick or dying from something we don't know and it's clearly incurable. He's pushing for the experiments on Mike's wife because he thinks he's found the answers to preserving his own life. This doesn't end well for him. Either way, his actions are horrific, barbaric, and he seems to take great pleasure from them. There is little science in his study. But the craziest part is why Mike allowed all this to be done to his wife almost 100 times. As I said, we're told those who returned from the dead became violent and dangerous, but the only people we see showing violence and being dangerous are the ones who haven't died. Tom is straight up hunting and killing this kid for shits and giggles. Lauren butchered her daughter to death multiple times, and at least once we see it's while the child is screaming for help and trying to get away. Mike and his friends repeatedly killed and butchered Carrie, and she only became violent when she found out, which is pretty logical. So who was the real threat here? The plot, while has a brilliant premise and could have been a new take on a horror classic, it chooses to focus on filling the script with scenes to extend the runtime instead of using any of those scenes to depict anything it's telling us or explaining anything that we're being told. We're just supposed to take it at face value and believe everything, and for me, that's terrible storytelling. The story is convoluted and full of holes. Ultimately, there's barely a story at all. The performances are great in spite of the confusion, though the makeup effects are not consistent from scene to scene, and the sound mixing is a huge letdown. If the film had just spent more time depicting the story, really going into it and showing us, or even explaining what you're trying to tell us is going on, then it could have been a really fun time. Ultimately, it was just an okay made ball of confusion. Imagine sitting down to watch The Matrix, and these characters go up to Mr. Anderson and tell him, this world is not real, you're in a machine that is simulating the real world, you're actually asleep in a giant tube of kind of amniotic fluid. And then they never actually showed that. They never showed, Zion. They never showed the waking up process. They just kept showing you in the Matrix and people just telling you that it was the Matrix. Would you believe it? Or would you just think all these people are freaking nuts and the Matrix is in their head and they all need help? That's how I feel with Animosity. You can't constantly tell the viewer X, Y, and Z and never show us X, Y, and Z. You can't have Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone have Hagrid go up to Harry and say, "You're a wizard, Harry," and then never actually depict Harry being a wizard. Do you see my point here? I'm pretty sure I made my point plenty of times in the actual review, but I'm just emphasizing it one more time because you can't do that. You just can't do that. It's not cool. But anyway, that is it for this review. If you have by chance seen Animosity, then please comment down below, share your thoughts on it. I would love to hear your take on it. Maybe you got more out of it than I did. Maybe you saw something that I didn't. Wherever you are, I hope you are doing well, you're watching lots of movies, you're taking care of yourself, you're staying healthy and happy, and if not, invest in a boxing bag. Seriously, take out your frustration on a boxing bag. It is so good. But that is it for this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. So until then, bye!